Are you stuck in the same old routine at work? Do you find yourself hitting a creative wall, unable to see beyond your current perspective? It's time to break free and unlock the power of fresh perspectives. David Guthrow, Discover Fresh Perspectives. And today we're going to discover some fresh perspectives with William Azaroff. Welcome, William.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So, William, there's so many things that we could talk about, but I thought I'd zero in on one thing. And you published a book in 2021 entitled "Everything I Learned About Leadership, I Learned from Filmmaking." And you're not doing anything like that today, but maybe you could first tell me what prompted you to want to write a book about your experiences in filmmaking, and what were those experiences in filmmaking?
Yeah, I think given my background in filmmaking, my first part of my career was in the sort of creative arts. So I've always had that inclination. And as I moved away from that, I found that I needed kind of a creative personal project. The busier I got as an executive leader, the more I needed to carve out time to have a project that was kind of more under my full control. Because as you move up, you actually, I find, have less control over your schedule, your time, especially in middle to upper management. If the CEO suddenly wants you, guess what? Your day gets rearranged, whether you like it or not. And so it had always been a desire of mine to write a book, like as long as I can remember. And I got to a place in my career where I thought the time was right. I presented on this topic. I used to help lead a conference for the credit union system, North America wide. It was sort of, I don't know, we kind of consider it almost like the TED Talks of the credit union world.
So I'm going to stop you for just a sec, because you talked about moving up. We talked about filmmaking, but what was the environment where you were moving up in?
Gotcha. So maybe I'll just go back a step. So I started my career as an independent filmmaker, did that for 12 years, never really made any money from it, but made a number of short films, one of which did very, very well, made a feature film, which went nowhere. And I was lucky enough that I lived in Seattle at the time in the 90s and got swept up with the .com movement, got involved. People saw the transfer of skills from producing films to producing digital content, digital like websites, CD-ROMs, whatever it was at the time. And so found I really enjoyed that. And it was a time in my life where I was ready to leave filmmaking behind. And so a dozen years of doing that, I ended up moving back to Vancouver, where I'm from, getting a job in the digital area of Van City Credit Union back in 2005, and moved up within that world to the point where I became director of digital. And then the organization was one where I was a good fit, and it took chances on me. So I got a lateral move from digital, heading up, online banking, digital marketing, the intranet, like all of our digital properties, over into community investment, which was really at the heart and soul of what the organization did, and very much aligned with the reasons why I wanted to work there. And I became, in over my head, the director of it was called Director of Business and Community Development, but it's basically Director of Community Investment. And then continued moving up, became VP of Community Investment. And then there was a couple years where the CEO at the time, Tamara Verman, created this interesting rotation where there are three of us selected. Each of us for 1 year would lead all the lines of business: branches, call center, wealth management, business banking, commercial real estate. Something like 15 or 1,600 of the 2,500 staff reported up to me for a year. So really got a huge test in sort of extensible leadership, going from a team of 35 to a team of 15, 1,600. And became really fascinated increasingly with the concepts of scalable leadership. And so that was the context in which I wrote the book.
Okay, so I cut you off. You're starting to describe a conference you were speaking at, or something like that. So I just wanted to give the listeners, whoever they may be out there, just a sense of what, where that was, the context.
No, thanks for herding me into something that made more sense. So, and you actually came to this conference 1 year. And so it was called the Credit Union Water Cooler Symposium. And it was a chance for credit unions to come together and hear big ideas. It wasn't so much about how to increase your marketing efficacy by 12%. It was big philosophical ideas. And 1 year, and I would always present, and 1 year they asked me to do something different. They didn't say what that was. And I came up with this idea. I called this session "Everything I Learned About Leadership, I Learned from Filmmaking." And it was increasingly, as I was moving up at Van City, I would have these kind of moments where I was talking to a group of employees, but I felt almost transported through time to a time in my career when I was a young man on the on the set of a film, talking to the cinematographer and a couple of actors about the staging of a scene. And I had these like flashback moments, and I found myself referencing back to my early days making films where I was in this leadership position at a very young age, in way over my head. And I was starting having flashbacks to that as I was moving up the ladder at a director level, especially at Van City. So did this talk, went over very well, and came back and immediately scripted out the outline of a book, and then did nothing on that book for 8 years while I continued moving up, and it just wasn't a priority. But every few months I'd think about that outline, I'd look at it, and I'd think someday. And in 2019, 2018, that day started arriving. I started working on it, fleshing it out, writing a draft, writing another draft. And I wrote several drafts of this book between 2018 and 2021 when I self-published it.
So, when you talked about how you had these flashbacks to the time when you were in filmmaking, it kind of feels like some of the lessons you learned were somehow absorbed into your DNA.
Yeah.
And they just kind of popped out. So could you give a couple of examples of what some of those lessons were and how you applied them in your role at Van City? And by the way, I understand that you've moved on from Van City a number of years ago, and now you are the very successful CEO of a not-for-profit Brightside Community Homes Foundation, and have managed to my assumption is take some of those lessons to create a great team that gets like an incredible amount of work done and having a good time doing it. So, but let me step back. And
no, thank you for
myself.
That. But yeah, no, I there was sort of a moment. I was in my office. I was recently promoted to be director of digital, or whatever the title of that role was at the time. And I remember listening to two employees who were quite different people. One was a project manager, very kind of by the book, schedule, budget. And the other was in the early days of social media coordinator, who was much more kind of free thinking, like in a good way, ad hoc, opportunistic, hard to strategize when the environment is moving that fast. And they were having a disagreement outside my office. And I was just sort of listening to it, right? I don't feel a need to get in, like, I didn't need to get involved in that moment, but I had a really strong flashback to being on a film set and working with different actors. So the thing I loved about one of the many things I loved about making films, but one of the things I loved most was working with actors. And so you'd be on a set, everyone had their lines memorized, you're blocking out a scene, the camera's here, the lighting's there, and every actor wants you to work with them in a different way. Some are very kind of perfunctory. They know their lines. They have a sense of the character. They come in, they do their work. They're like workhorses, and they leave. And they don't need a lot from the director unless they're off base. Others want to have long philosophical conversations about where was this character just before the scene? What's their background? Where were they born? And they write 10-page biographies of this character that are necessary for their process. Others want you to literally give them a line reading. How would you say this? Others, that would be so offensive. And you're on set working with maybe 3 actors at the same time, each of them wanting you to work with them in a different way, but you need to achieve a common outcome. At the end of the day, the person watching the film can't know any of that. They just have to see a film that makes sense. And I loved that. I loved being a bit chameleonic in my leadership, although I wouldn't have used that word as a 24-year-old making films, but giving each actor what they needed from me to be able to be their best while working in concert, all along the line of the direction that I had set out, the vision I had, the strategy I had to make this film, this scene, this moment, regardless how broad or narrow you want to define that. And that's where I realized that I was the only filmmaker in leadership at Van City. It's not a common background, especially at a financial institution. But I found that the thing people told me they liked about working with me is I brought out the best of who they were. I didn't try and get them to be a mini me or get them to be something they weren't. The way to work with actors is you help them be the best actor they can be. You don't try and turn them into a different kind of actor or a different kind of set, crew member or whatever. And so that was the genesis where I thought, there are things I actually did learn from making these indie films in my 20s that are totally relatable and actually important to lead a team of diverse backgrounds and diverse skill sets now. In my at that point, I was in well into my 30s, or even close to, yeah, I was probably close to 40.
So that's a very effective way to lead people. It's also very energy intensive. I have run into managers that would just as soon manage everyone the same way because it makes it easier for them, even though it may not be nearly as effective for the employees or the organization.
Yeah, and so let's go back to filmmaking. I mean, broadly speaking, there's many different kinds of filmmakers. But what I found when I made Filmmaker is they've excuse me, they tend to fall into two groups. One are the collaborative people, and the other are the self-centered people. And so you see this a lot in leadership. There are those who it's all about them. On social media, we see the sort of selfie CEO where every photo that they put up is them centered against, excuse me, just a second.
For those that are listening, Bill just took a shot of vodka. Sorry,
Yeah,
carry on,
exactly.
Bill. William, go for it.
William, yeah. So like so it depends. As a filmmaker, do you center yourself? And it's easy to do that because it's easy for the director to be the center of attention. I was never fully comfortable or confident in that mode. To me, especially in those early days making films, nobody was getting paid. This was a labor of love for everyone. So I was always amazed that people liked the script and my vision enough that they're willing to cash in some vacation hours or end a contract and take a bit of time and invest their time into this film. They got some experience. They had some fun. They got a credit on their resume, but ultimately they were setting aside their valuable time to help me achieve something. And so how do I make it? It's as much about them as it is about me. And so that was just the inherent way that it just seems logical. And so that's where filmmaking is this great background, because that sort of set, like you said, it almost got inculcated into my DNA, because that became the way I just related to how to work with people. And the other thing is, I think it's easy as leaders, as managers, to forget the experience we had when we weren't a manager. Who did we like to report to? It wasn't that person where, look, once you became a manager, your pay goes up, your influence goes up, but you also, it's a huge part of your job. You can't just consider it, oh yeah, I'm a manager, but I have this other stuff to do. Management becomes a third, a half of the job. And so I think if you see it that way, then you learn to adapt to how to bring out the best of people. And if you want diverse backgrounds, diverse cultures, diversity writ large, no matter how you define that, you have to learn to be the person without losing sight of yourself. I'm always me, but how do I bring out the parts of me that will help this person best understand the work in front of them?
So, William, you've brought this experience from making film into Van City, and you have a particular style of leading. As much, we don't want to get into the conversation about the difference between leading and managing, but a certain style that works for you, where you really engaging other people in a vision. However, the difference between working in a large organization and doing a film is it's your film, right? There's kind of a container around it. But when you work in a larger organization, there's other people that you're interfacing with besides your own people at your level or higher. So, how do you deal with it if someone else has quite a different leadership style than yours, if you ever ran into that?
Yeah, I mean, two things come to mind. One is one of the things I was very fortunate about at Van City and now at Brightside is I really felt connected to the mission, the vision, values of the organization. I liked the strategies. I wanted to get on side. I knew that I was a part of a machine, but it wasn't my accountability, responsibility, or aptitude to create the strategic plan. That was the board's. So I did challenge things I can't control. And on that sense, film is similar. I am not a cinematographer. So when I hire a cinematographer and find someone who has that skill that I love to work with, they have technical background and skills, ways of lighting things that I hire someone great and I trust them and I learn from them and hopefully they learn from me. And so I think it's actually a good background on a number of levels because I was constantly working with people who knew how to do things I didn't. And so if there was another leader who their style was such that I had trouble with, I mean, sometimes you have to learn how to work with people, but often I would try when possible to invest time into that person and try and understand them, because just like that cinematographer, the VP of credit has a background that until I worked at Van City, I didn't care about. But suddenly I needed to understand that person, their concerns, because they might stand in the way of a community investment deal that made a lot of sense to me, but didn't to them. And you invest into those relationships and you put kind of money in the bank, so to speak, in those relationships. And then you can make withdrawals. Like if I build up that relationship and they have confidence that I know what I'm talking about and I understand their point of view, then I can bring those deals forward in a way that suddenly make more sense to them. And there are some people you just can't work with, but that's pretty few and far between. Yeah.
Well, it seems like one of the advantages of working with an organization like Van City is that, they're all under the umbrella of a common strategy and set of values and contributions. So, even though there's these differences in style and approach, if it was a Venn diagram, there's, a piece in the middle that says we all believe in the mission and want to do it. And that's, that kind of makes it a little bit easier to have those tough conversations because, that's one thing you have in common.
That's right. And similar with a film, you have a script. And so what is the script about? What is the director's interpretation of the script? There is one interpretation of the script. And then from there, so if there was a cinematographer who wanted to film something in a way, or an editor who wanted to cut something together in a way that didn't seem right to me, I would get curious. And often they were seeing a connection to their method and something they saw in the script. And often I'd be like, oh, I didn't even realize that. And I saw it as a superior choice because I grew to understand it. And the same thing is true. Like I could never again work for an organization that wasn't mission driven and values driven, because you do have that common script that you're all basing it against. So I found that when I did get into disagreements, if I could clearly paint the way that this idea, this decision, I want to make it this way because I see how it lines up with our strategy, our mission, vision, values. And if I can paint that, you can get a lot of people on board with that. Or have people then, at least you're taking the personalities out of it. You've depersonalized the conversation. I'm not fighting you. It's your job then to say, but this other idea also aligns. And now you're having a war of ideas, which is healthy, rather than a war of personalities, which is not.
So now, so then you had to work together, right, for the common purpose. But now you have moved to Brightside Community Homes Foundation. How long have you been there, William?
Almost exactly 5 years.
Okay. And could you just say a little bit about that organization? Then I have a few questions to jump into. So,
so we're a nonprofit housing society formed in 1952. We have 26 buildings in all in the city of Vancouver. We just acquired one building in Burnaby. So we're very much Vancouver based. And we provide deeply affordable rents to about 1,000 people in Vancouver.
And now you are at the top. You're the CEO. So you don't have to. I mean, you could control the way things happen in your organization.
Could I do that?
Theoretically, it might not. Your DNA might not allow you to do that, William. But how have some of the concepts that you wrote about, everything I learned about leadership, I learned from filmmaking, translate into a role now where you are the CEO?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in essence, it's in a lot of ways, it's not much different. So I hear what you're saying, but I actually disagree. I can't control everything. Like I just can't. But I get what you're saying. Like my span of influence is larger, but two things, and it's the same conversation we just had. I didn't come into this organization with 30 years of housing experience. I did some work with affordable housing providers when I was in community investment at Van City. I was somewhat involved tangentially with the sector, but I knew enough to be dangerous, not enough to be helpful. So I needed a team full of operations people and maintenance people and housing services people, income review people, all the people who help this place operate on a day-to-day basis. These are the people that I needed them to keep doing their jobs and make their lives easier. In order to make the place more successful. And I needed to learn from them so that I could be competent as their leader. And what they could learn from me, I think, is that sense of how important an organization's culture is, that mission, vision, values, these things that allow, it's again, that script of an organization, getting back to the film analogy, so that people are all singing off the same song sheet. They're all reading off the same script. They're all on the same page. And when they're not, you can come back to that and say, okay, what's going on here? And I might have to be that tiebreaker decision maker, which is fine. But I'm basing it on some transparent information that we all have access to, our mission, vision, values, our strategy, our culture, et cetera.
So, which is great. And, one of the things I sense is that you need to collaborate with other levels of government and other organizations and things like that. And so my sense is you do a lot of that. Yeah, like you
Yeah.
seem to be everywhere, right? It's like what was it in Toronto? Chicken Man, he's everywhere, he's everywhere. So connecting with all these different organizations. So what's the connecting fiber? Because people seem to like to come and see what Brightside Community Homes Foundation is doing.
Yeah.
My sense is it's a good community partner, and other people want to see what's going on and see you as a valued, contributor to the Lower Mainland and now Burnaby. Oh, I guess Burnaby's in Lower Mainland, but how do you how do you go about doing that? So you're leading an organization, but you're also providing leadership in the sector, and I'm just kind of curious what that. Now, I could be overstating, but my sense is you provide leadership in the sector. So how do you go about doing that? And specifically, if we can relate it back to anything that you wrote about in your book.
Yeah, there's actually, here's a story that just popped to mind that I write about in the book, which is I was living in Seattle. I was 28, I think. I was ramping up to make my first and only feature film. This was a huge endeavor, and was something it was really the culmination of everything I'd been doing in film. My goal was to make a feature film. I don't have regrets about leaving film, but if I'd never made a feature film, I think I would. And in the middle of all this, one day I got a call from my landlord, and he was like, "William, you never missed a rent payment before, but you didn't pay rent last month. What's up?" And I felt deeply embarrassed. I'd just been so busy with the film and a day job that I didn't pay rent. And so we started talking about why I was late for rent. Obviously I paid rent immediately. And I started telling him about the film. And he started asking about the film. And I was jazzed and excited. And this didn't occur to me, but by the end of this conversation, we went from a late rent payment to him investing in my film.
No.
And so I think the lesson learned there, which I didn't do intentionally, is, if you're doing something that you're excited about and you share that excitement, he went from being like, and I was a responsible person, I was a responsible tenant, I had a good history of paying rent, we had a good relationship, but I was able to inadvertently sell him on this thing I'd been doing, and I think about that time to time, like, when I took over at Brightside, we didn't have a super strong relationship with BC Housing. We didn't really have a relationship with CMHC. We had sort of a perfunctory relationship with City of Vancouver. And I saw these organizations as essential to our success. And thinking about it now, I hadn't thought about this before until you said it. I think about that conversation with my landlord because I share our mission, vision, values. I share our strategy. I talk about the direction our board is taking. And suddenly these partners want to help us do that. Or we see the ways that we intersect so that the work they do and the work we do can maximize our potential. And we are also an organization that's quite entrepreneurial, which is something I like. So whether it's our net zero strategy, our work on Indigenous relations, our work on redeveloping our older properties to build a lot more homes, I'm lucky that I've got a board, the board who hired me, who are very ambitious around these things. And you share those ambitions and people want to be a part of that. So I think that I think the thing that has always been a core to me is I have to work on things that excite me. And as I've gotten older and more senior, I've been lucky enough to be able to steer my career towards that level of excitement. And you generate that excitement, you share that excitement, whether it's internally with staff, whether it's externally with partners and shareholders or investors or whatever it is you're talking to. I think that's the common thing. And I'm not a salesperson, but I'm somebody who, if I'm excited about something, that excitement becomes infectious.
And I've certainly seen that, and I'm feeling it in this conversation. So I have perhaps two more things I'd like to explore. One may be putting you on the spot a little bit. Well, of course it is. It's my podcast. I get to do this. So if you were to think about what the next book is, that's contained learning, since the last book, that you want to leave something as a legacy because you really think it would make a difference. Does a title happen to pop into mind? I realize it's putting a lot of pressure on you, but I know you thrive with pressure. So
yeah, no, I do have the outline of the next book. I'm in no hurry to write it because these are truly personal passion projects. So I'm not trying to make money off of them or hit any kind of a deadline. I mean, the working title, which I don't know if it's good or not, is capital I impact. And the idea is all the different ways that I've worked in organizations to help amplify, strategize, and create impact, positive impact in the community, social impact mostly. Um, I've been involved with a lot of things that I think are instructive to other organizations who want to go along a certain path. So I've got the outline. I actually started a first draft, and it's an interesting lesson. Having written the first book, which I wrote truly for myself, this book, I was picturing the audience more, and I started writing stuff that was, I thought, kind of drivel. It was kind of reductionist. And so I'm trying to get the audience out of my head, think less about writing for an audience and more about creating a great work, writing it for the sake of the work, not for the sake of the outcome. And so I'm gonna start from scratch. But anyway, but that's the idea. And the working title is capital I impact, because even at Van City, we would talk about impact. Capital I impact was, say, investing in an affordable housing project. Small I impact was good customer service. And those all have impact, but it was really like we would delineate between the two by calling one capital I and one lowercase or small I impact. So that's where the idea came from. It may change.
Well, but it's very, very cool. I mean, it sounds like it's coming from a spirit of service,
Yeah.
right? In a larger context, which is great. So okay, you handled that one easily. So the last one, and by the way, in the program notes, I'm going to put the name of the book, and I know it's on Amazon because I looked it up before we had.
It's on all the major. You can buy most places you buy books.
And you could buy like dozens if you wanted to. And
you could buy dozens.
And give to your friends. And I'll also put in Brightside Community Homes Foundation, because I think it's a really neat organization as an example of what can be done. So the last thing I'd like you just to think about, if there's some tips that were identified in your book and that you've actually found work in practice that you might leave for others that are interested, are there two or three things that would come to mind? You know, if you do this, these are the things that I found make the biggest difference. Because I'm sure there's a lot of gems in there, but there's some that are better polished than others.
Yeah. I mean, and every chapter I tried to come up with one analogy between my sort of business or career and filmmaking. So each one delves into one. I mean, a couple that come to mind that I haven't already touched on, because I've touched on a couple, is giving feedback. So another analogy I would see is in filmmaking, a lot of other filmmakers would give me a draft of their script to read and give feedback. And I took that as a super serious responsibility, that I was really trying to think, and I would ask the filmmaker or the writer a lot about what they're intending to do so that I could try and give them feedback that would help make their script better, not turn into the script I wish they'd written or the script I would have written, but how do I help them make their script better, even if I would do things differently? And the analogy there is performance reviews and performance development and performance potential. What's the direction that person, that employee, or that peer wants to take their career? How do you give them advice and feedback to help them advance their career? Not what will serve you, not what will get them out of your office quickest, not what will put out a fire, but understanding if the direction of that person's career means that this organization is not the right fit for them. How do you give them that feedback without it, in the least awkward, confrontational way possible? Again, with that writer, I would try and always be led with a spirit of kindness. Wasn't always successful, because sometimes the scripts are really bad, but I try and be kind but clear with my feedback. And the same is true now. So there's one analogy, because I think a lot of managers, leaders struggle with feedback because they come from a place of frustration or wanting to change someone, which we all know cannot be done. But instead, how do you inspire someone, and how do you help someone move forward on the path that they want to move forward on? Yeah, that's one nugget.
And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people use the phrase, "Oh, okay, so William, can I just be brutally honest?"
Right.
No,
No.
you can't be brutally honest. You can be kind and giving feedback that enables that person to grow.
Yeah, kindly honest. It's a very good point. Brutal. There's no room for brutality in feedback. It should be coming from a place of generosity. Otherwise, keep your mouth shut. Like, you're not going to help anybody. It's a great point.
Yeah. So should I press you for one more, or should I let it go at that?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, each chapter has one. So there's one about being an imposter where, like, especially that time I became in that rotation and suddenly went from literally leading a group of 35 to leading a group of 15, 1600, and felt like a total imposter. And again, in the arts, like when I was a young man making films, like I would walk onto a film set at 21 years old and be the director who'd put all this together and felt like a total imposter. But you just have to learn to get to work through that and say, we're all here, let's do this together. And so, and in fact, if once in a while, like every few years, you don't feel like an imposter, you might be too comfortable in your position. That every now and then feeling like an imposter means that you're stretching something, you're going beyond your boundaries. And if you don't ever do that professionally, you might be stale. You might not be challenging yourself. You might not be open to new opportunities. You might be a little stuck. And so that be an imposter, getting comfortable with the imposter syndrome, not all the time, because it can be exhausting, but once in a while, it can be very healthy and reinvigorating.
So I just want to make a distinction because you talk about the imposter syndrome, and in some cases that could be an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
And in other cases, it can be paralyzing and used as an excuse for not growing. So I hear you talking about it as an opportunity to grow into what
it's got to be a manageable imposter syndrome. If you've really been thrust into a position that you are just going to fail at, and I've been in those too, that's no fun. And so I one of the roles I had at Vancity was a role that wasn't a good fit for me. I worked harder in that role than in any other role, and I was less successful, and it was hard. So it has to be a realistic stretch. So, but it can't break you. And so only you can adjudicate when that is. And you want to take some time to adjudicate it, because 6 months after feeling a really bad stretch, you might suddenly be like, oh, actually, this is okay. But if it's never going to be okay, if it's just wrong, then yeah, you might need to make a bigger change. That's a good point.
So the 2 points that I heard was one around give growth-oriented feedback for the person to whom you're giving it, and work through the imposter syndrome, and to grow personally, to grow for yourself. So William, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciated it, and I'm sure there's lots of nuggets in there that people, should they choose to, can do something with. So thanks once again.
Yeah, thank you, David. I really appreciate your including me in your project here.
David Guthrow, Discover Fresh Perspectives. Subscribe now, because on Fresh Perspectives, every episode is an opportunity to explore new horizons and redefine what's achievable.